While the eyes of the world quite rightly turned towards Gaza, a quiet war overseen by extremist ministers in the Israeli government is being waged against Palestinians on the occupied West Bank. Israel insists that it's fighting Hamas. But in the West Bank, Fatah is the leading political party and Palestinian authorities in charge. So what is happening in the West Bank is nothing to do with Hamas and does make this conflict look more like one between Israel versus Palestinians than Israel versus Hamas. I've just got back from the West Bank, having spent the best part of a month talking to people who almost every night were being visited by settlers who would come in and destroy their cars or beat them up or often hit their wives. Their children were traumatized by this. And the message really was, get out or die. It's lawless. Kind of reminded me of Mad Max 2, if you've seen that nightmare film. And the settlers are a bit like that. Sometimes it might be villagers going out to collect their olives, and a pack of settlers might emerge with M16 machine guns and spray bullets around the place to scare them off the land, or they use the guns to beat up some of the male villagers and then shoot the water tanks, come in also with bulldozers. Cars are incinerated, the houses, there have been attempts to burn down the houses, the sheep, etc. have been scattered, in some cases just shot. They burnt the olive groves, and they come into your house and they'll smash up your house, and then they will steal for your money, and acts of incredible aggression. The Israeli authorities just don't do anything about it. The international community is mute. When I last looked, 16 of these little village encampments have been erased. The villagers have found it just impossible to survive. They've had to leave their land. And this is, of course, a crime under international law, a forcible dispossession of occupied people from their land and their replacement by another people brought in by the occupying power. And there's no question that these settlers are protected by the Israeli Defense Force. There's a tendency for the police to say, no, nothing to do with us. Because the police, of course, are under the overall control of this delectable character, Mr. Ben-Gvir, head of the Jewish Power Party, settler leader, very sympathetic to the settler cause. Hanging on his front room was a picture of the mass murderer, Goldstein, who went into the Tomb of the Patriarchs and machine gunned to death 29 Palestinians. Goldstein is a man very widely admired for that act of murderous violence, and Ben-Gvir admired him.
אמירה מאוד מאוד מפורשת. כשהבן שלך בא ושואל אותך, מי זה אבא? מי זה האיש הזה שם בתמונה? שהוא צדיק, אני אומר לו שהוא גיבור, אני אומר...
And he represents a particularly dangerous tradition which really sees Palestinians as having no rights to any land in Palestine. Along with his comrade in arms, the head of the religious Zionist party, Bezalel Smotrich, they're brought into a coalition with what is in any case a really right-wing political party, Likud, with Prime Minister Netanyahu, in order to save his skin politically and actually keep himself out of jail, because if he's out of power, he's very likely to be convicted of corruption and go to jail. And what does Netanyahu do? He gives the West Bank to these two racist settler leaders. Ben-Gvir is made National Security Minister. Smotrich is made equivalent of Chancellor of the Exchequer, Finance Minister, but he's also given this title of head of the civil administration, if that's an Orwellian title, if ever there was one, in the West Bank. It's important to understand what that actually means. To understand that, you have to understand a little bit about how the West Bank works, and indeed how the system of apartheid, as it's regarded by most human rights organizations, actually works. If you're a Palestinian living in the West Bank, you don't, under Israeli law, have any rights of any kind. You are subject to military law. Now, if you are a settler living illegally under international law in the West Bank, you have full civil rights. There's a complete difference in status. The civil administration of the West Bank is in the hands of the military. It's up to Mr. Smotrich to decide whether or not Palestinian can move around the place safely, or to Mr. Smotrich to decide whether he or she can build a house, and so forth. He controls the details of the ordinary lives of Palestinians, while Ben-Gvir has security control. And the two people given this position are two of the ugliest, nastiest bigoted racists you can possibly imagine, who do not believe Palestinians have any rights at all. That was the situation before October the 7th, and of course it has got considerably worse. The first thing which Ben-Gvir did after October the 7th was start to hand out guns. The number of killings of Palestinians has escalated dramatically, and this kind of destruction. Around Nablus, I spoke to the mayor of a village where the settlers were distributing notes saying, "Go to Jordan, await the great Nakba," the Nakba being, of course, the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians from what is now Israel in 1948. I heard the same stories up in Mustafa Yatta, "Get out or die." So it was heartbreaking being in the olive harvest season in the West Bank and seeing that they were scared to go and collect their olives because they couldn't. They were being banned from doing so. And the settlers also were coming down and attacking schools, and so the schools weren't operating, so the children couldn't go to school. The court system doesn't work in Palestine. It hasn't been doing since October the 7th. So that's collapsed. The banking system has gone, so every check is bouncing if you're Palestinian. Then, of course, this fragrant character, Smotrich, has cut off the money from the Palestinian Authority, couldn't pay the teachers, can't pay any state employee. For instance, all the nurses in the hospitals in Nablus, where I was, weren't getting paid. And actually, they're having to work double the time, and so they're working double shifts for no money. If this goes on for much longer, it's going to lead to terrible problems. It already is. The economy is frozen. There's a paralysis. It's gone into a nosedive. You've really got to fear what's going to happen next. Meanwhile, there's been a wave of arrests across the West Bank, often with no charges attached. Many of them, of course, children. And they come out and the accounts of torture, of beating up, of brutality. It's really frightening. Most terrible of all, of course, was the revelation from the State Department whistleblower who revealed.
I was part of the human rights vetting process for arms going to Israel, and a charity called Defense of Children International Palestine drew our attention at the State Department to the sexual assault, actually the rape of a 13-year-old boy that occurred in an Israeli prison in the Moscabia in Jerusalem. We examined these allegations. We believed they were credible. We put them to the government of Israel. And you know what happened the next day? The IDF went into the DCIP offices and removed all their computers and declared them a terrorist entity.
Something's gone horrendously wrong in that situation. Most interesting thing in some ways of all about that testimony from the State Department official is that the United States kept that quiet. We only know about it because of a whistleblower. The Americans were happy with the situation. They were happy to keep it quiet. They were therefore complicit, of course, in this barbarous situation where the reaction of the Israeli state to serious evidence of alleged rape in an Israeli jail of a 13-year-old Palestinian boy is to punish and go after the people who revealed that and to cover it up. This has been going on, by the way, for years, and there's nothing happens. When the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, went to Ramallah, where the Palestinian Authority is based in the West Bank, before October the 7th, the settlers had erased a village where about 150 people had lived, called Ain Samia, quite near Ramallah. And Cleverly wanted to go there and see what had happened, particularly because there was a school which Britain had helped fund, which had been destroyed in this village. And he asked to go, and the Israelis said, no, you can't. If he'd actually cared, he would have made a fuss. He'd have said, I have been banned by the Israeli authorities from going to this Palestinian village which has been destroyed by settlers. But he was good as gold. He didn't want to offend his hosts. That is a kind of complicity which you now get and have been getting for years of Western politicians. I don't want us to hold up the wretched James Cleverly to be lacerated because they're all as bad. That is how they conduct themselves. They do not want, for some reason, in the face of grotesque, what are war crimes, they don't want to complain. And it's very upsetting because it shames Britain. It tells the world that Britain or the United States or the European Union We say that we care about human rights, and we make these great statements about atrocities committed by, say, Putin in Ukraine. And we're very happy to do that when it comes to, say, Russia, but of course we won't do that when it comes to Israel. And the problem here is that you're expecting different standards of behavior from different types of people, depending on whether they're your ally or not. And the message the rest of the world gets, of course, is that we are totally cynical. We don't actually have any values at all. We've simply weaponized the issue of human rights in order to attack our foes, discredit our foes, and to support our allies. But if Israel carries out massacres, commits war crimes, I think it's our duty as an ally of Israel, actually, to warn them. When Rishi Sunak went to Tel Aviv shortly after October the 7th, he said Britain was giving our unequivocal backing to Netanyahu, i.e. we were handing him a blank check. Already by that time, Israeli leaders were coming out with genocidal statements. It would have been the act of a true friend of Israel to have issued a warning. Act carefully, obey international humanitarian law, do not kill innocent civilians. We got none of that from the British Prime Minister, who failed in his task as a statesman. As for James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, he was dismal. I mean, he went there and he allowed his Israeli counterpart to take over, answer his questions for him. It was quite pathetic. Maggie Thatcher was a true friend of Israel, but when the Shatila and Sabra camps, the massacres happened there with Israeli complicity, she called it pure barbarism. That was the act of a friend of Israel, not Rishi Sunak going to Tel Aviv and giving Netanyahu a blank check. You can rely on the British media either to ignore or to twist every story which really matters in this world. That's why it's important to pay attention to Double Down News and support it on Patreon.